invaded Poland. And the rest, as they say, is history. Ladies and gentlemen, war isn't pretty. As one of the few people in this room who's actually served as, I can tell you that even in a country that doesn't actively fight war, war isn't pretty. But sometimes we must pay the ultimate price for the ultimate ideals. And that is why we on opposing government are proud to forward our extension on 3 bases. First, people can die, but they must never die in vain. Second, war is temporary, but oppression is permanent. And finally, self-defense is never tradable with questions of expediency and logistics. To understand this extension, I'm going to forward 3 main arguments in this particular speech to sum up our case as a whole. First and foremost, an imperfect solution, thank you, sir, is not an invalid solution. Second, I'm going to talk to you about how the opposition's ethos, their value system, lacks the urgency that championing human rights requires. Finally, I'm going to deal with their extension about the integrity of civilizations and take down Robin's argument on institutional clash. But first and foremost, an imperfect solution is not an invalid solution. The core of the arguments to the 3 speakers coming from the opposition is that we can give you a litany of examples where US occupation was not perfect. There were nitty-gritty details that didn't quite suit our fancy-pants taste. And we say that doesn't take on the principle of why military force, don't answer, provides a direct impetus upon a regime that is wantonly firing bullets into an unarmed crowd. More importantly, ladies and gentlemen, we argue that it is better we go for imperfect solutions than risk that stagnation that has taken place in numerous countries across the world. We've allowed the Burmese government to systematically oppress their people for decades. And even if, thank you sir, a UN solution or an ASEAN solution may create some niggling problems tomorrow, we say it's better because we're moving towards change. And the people, although living in a war-torn country, thank you sir, have a better chance of eventually gaining back their dignities. Whereas in the status quo, their government has completely separated them from the humanity. And the rest of the world, thank you sir, is privileged to enjoy. More importantly, ladies and gentlemen, we say there are certain wars that are difficult to fight by simply putting boots on the ground, and all we need are smarter kinds of wars. We're not saying we're going to invade every single military instance. Something I personally champion is the use of the no-fly zone in Libya, for example, because burdened by the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, the US decided it needed a nuanced solution. So rather than wholesale invasion into Libya, they established a no-fly zone, which protected human rights, which shut down Chinese civilians. No, thank you, sir. But more importantly, was military force that decided people's lives were worth saving. More importantly, ladies and gentlemen, I believe that you can't claim that the UN sucks. This is something that Raghun told us. He says the UN is terrible, the US will take itself to itself, which is kind of ironic, because presumably the engagement that the opposition is supporting is going to be broken by the same Western democracies and United Nations. So if it's corrupt, then you've got to do that too. Which then leads me then to my second argument, that although war and military force isn't great, no thank you sir, it's better than nothing. And why it's better than nothing is because they are willing to go with apathetic, slow-burn solutions that typically work only decades, whereas lives are being lost in a matter of seconds. Now, Robin tells us that the dictator always wants to be managed. Well, thank you, sir. And this is why he releases alternatives. Well, engagements are great because we just give them a voice. In 2005, the Janjaweed military was wantonly killing African-born, not Arab Africans, but African Africans, simply because they were sharing a different racial ethnicity. This has nothing to do with political gain. They weren't trying to wave around their nuclear credentials like Ahmadinejad or Kim Jong-il. They were despotic because they were genocidal, because they were racist. Tell me then, how would you engage the Janjaweed military? Oh yeah, sure, you can kill about 50% and then, say 50%. That doesn't work, ladies and gentlemen. There is no urgency, there is no logic, when we're dealing with human rights abuses in these interest-like situations. Defend that example.
You propose that we let Western governments break their document in the UN bill, but it is precisely this that allows them to have no checks on their actions and exploit.
I actually disagree with that. I say that when the UN or the US goes in, and the UN then runs inspections, of elections that then take place and help to build democracy, we have more chances for accountability, because then the international media can actually come into this post-war country and take a look. In the current status quo, where war is currently taking place, and when the dictator has built up walls or metaphorical iron curtains, there is no chance for oversight whatsoever, no chance the media can go in, and no chance international law can be applied. The chance is better in our situation. We understand, ladies and gentlemen, that economic sanctions sometimes work, and that's why we champion the use of them in the case of South Africa. But in the case of Mali, where the civil uprising saw soldiers firing bullets into hospitals and schools, this is no time for 5-year plans or economic sanctions that loss and the urgency, no thank you sir, is unfortunately not shared by you. Bear in mind, ladies and gentlemen, we're not here to say, let's go guns firing in every single country or in every single instance. We support the use, no thank you sirs, of military force in the championing of human rights because it's a crucial tool as a basket of foreign policy options that are sometimes necessary. Which brings me to my final constructive or rebuttal, which is about institutional systems. Now, this is something that Robin actually hasn't taken down. Oh, thank you, sir. Marvin told you that morality can only make sense if it can be carried out. International law, ladies and gentlemen, has no meaning if the countries that wrote those same laws aren't willing to enforce them. They become empty words, ladies and gentlemen, ink on pieces of paper. And we argue that if this is the case, let's tear up the United Nations Declarations of Human Rights, because no one is willing to tell dictators that there is a stick next to the carrot of options that we have out here. And we say, ladies and gentlemen, that you embolden dictators in this scenario because a world without military force means that the worst option that could happen to them is economic sanctions. Yeah, worst case scenario then becomes a calculus of, should I become more poor or should I become more poor? And that's nothing terrifying for them at all, because if they were despotic dictators in the first place, they were willing to countenance impoverishing their own people. And so we say international law becomes broken in their system because it lacks urgency and it lacks a stick that some dictators need. Now, arguably, ladies and gentlemen, that we agree that sometimes there is no legitimacy, and sometimes the US sets up governments that aren't perfect. But the recent Arab Spring showed us that we can't have the same monolithic assumption that propaganda always works in these countries. People in Egypt were asking for United States intervention because they said that you champion human rights so much. Back it up. Show to us that you really care about it and support our country. At the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, we understand that war is painful. But a bittersweet victory, a Pyrrhic victory,